Today we're going to be responding to the sequel to Adam Something's last video on Anarcho-Capitalism. I'm going to be skipping over the Iceland section and going straight to when he actually talks about a free society.
But this line of thinking leaves us with three possible options as to why Anarcho-Capitalism fell. Number one would be because of the Nordic invasion, number two because people were manipulated into voting for the takeover, and number three because people misjudged the situation and made their own call at the ballot box. And I have bad news for ANCAPs. All these options prove my point. They show you that an ANCAP society would either fall victim to a state's well-organized invasion force, or get subverted by propaganda, or people will vote on a feels-over-reals basis and end up screwing themselves over. Brexit.
Alright, we'll get to invasion a little bit later, but as far as manipulation and ignorance, these both have to do with voting. For it to even be anarcho-capitalism, you can't have the ability to vote on the government to take away rights from people.
And I personally think that if a country would transition into the ANCAP model somewhere, a military intervention scenario would be its most likely end. And it would be super convenient too. I mean, there would be no state to declare war on. There is no state. You just roll in with the tanks and announce martial law. Even if some people would resist, it would just be a handful of loosely coordinated militias, if that, against a regular army.
Alright, before we get into the debunk, I just want to point out for anyone watching this video that if you want a full explanation of how all of these things could work out in a free society, I would recommend listening to Stefan Molyneux's book, Practical Anarchy. You can find it on YouTube, absolutely free, linked in the description. It's 9 hours long and it'll give you the full explanation you need. My video will probably be providing a lot of summaries of some of the ideas in that book, and I'm just going to be using them to poke holes in pretty much everything Adam says here. So Adam says that taking over a free society would be super easy because there's no state to defend it, so you just have to roll in with the tanks and declare martial law. Let's think about the cost-benefit analysis that would have to be made before making this decision. First off, Adam is just assuming that Anarcho-Capitalism wouldn't be well defended, but we'll get to why that's wrong later. Let's start with the cost benefits. So I'm a dude from the country who lives right beside Anarcho-Capitalism, and I'm like, okay, should I invade Anarcho-Capitalism? Let's look at the pros and cons here. So usually when invading a country, the plan is defeat the military, take over the government, and then use the existing tax base as a permanent source of revenue. And based on what we know about the tax rates in that country, we can determine how much revenue we can get and to know if this invasion is going to be a profitable action. This is a bit harder for Anarcho-Capitalism because there is no tax base to take over. There are also no government assets or buildings or institutions. And we don't know how armed the population is going to be. And we don't even really have an objective when we get there. There's no capital to go to. There's no single army to defeat. There's really no way to judge the effectiveness of this invasion. I mean, we could just go door to door and take everybody's stuff and maybe take everybody as slaves, but if we do that, we're just going to be debasing our existing manufacturing and labor, which is just going to decrease our tax revenue, so we'll actually get poorer from that. Because if we do take slaves, we can't tax the slave labor. And how big of an army is going to be required to actually take over this entire place? We have no idea. If I'm invading an existing state, usually the general population doesn't revolt that much because it's just one state being replaced by another state, not a huge difference. But if it's Anarcho-Capitalism, every single citizen is going to be resisting a new state and taxation being thrust upon them, which gives them a huge incentive to fight back. So if I'm a state trying to invade another place, I'm not going to want to invade Anarcho-Capitalism, I'm going to want to invade a state where I have a guaranteed tax revenue by the end of it and a bunch of institutions that I can actually take over.
And of course, if you have some kind of very powerful high-tech military hardware, you need a very complicated logistics chain to maintain it. You know, Billy Joe can't just tow a Reaper drone to his shack to recalibrate his targeting AI or something. What an average ANCAP commune could do at most is maintain or create small arms and crude explosives, maybe.
This is such a weird assumption to make. Don't you put those black and white cowboys in front of me. Look, you can make it all work with private defense. Here's a quick rundown. The people of Anarcho-Capitalism want defense against invasion, but the last thing they want is the people defending them to turn on them. This is a great entrepreneurial opportunity. The only way my new business plan is going to be viable is if I can prevent invasions, not constantly fight them off. So what's the best way to prevent invasions? That's pretty easy. We use the good old McNuke. Not a single nuclear power has ever been threatened with invasion or invaded. So now I just have to formulate my business model in a way that satisfies the citizens of Anarcho-Capitalism, ensures that I won't turn on them by putting in a myriad number of safeguards, and we are good to go. I profit from keeping everybody safe, and everybody else gets safety and security. No reliance on a ragtag group with muskets and Molotovs.
So the unkept dream stumbles right at the starting line. And right here, right now, I could just stop bothering with all this, but I'd like to dig a little bit deeper. Let's give it all to ANCAPs, the most ideal scenario imaginable for the emergence of real-life anarcho-capitalism. An imaginary world where every country transitioned into anarcho-capitalism at the exact same time, all corporations were completely dissolved, all nuclear weapons were disarmed, and all complex military hardware beyond small arms was disposed of. All you have is people living freely with their guns, ready to enter into voluntary contracts with each other, having inherited all the infrastructure built out by the now dissolved governments, and everyone getting a fresh start at capitalism. So I believe that this would be a perfect, or at least near perfect, condition for anarcho-capitalism. So how will things work out? Let's take a look.
Alright, this is actually a pretty decent baseline, although I think the disabling of military equipment and nuclear disarmament isn't necessary, but this also kind of implies some level of regression from modern technology, which doesn't make any sense. We would have all the same technology that we have today, or better. We're about to enter into Adam's simulation, which is one really big hypothetical. Disproving hypotheticals is a kind of a waste of time because they don't really have to be substantiated in the first place, but regardless, I'm just going to poke holes in every single thing that he brings up because, it could be fun.
So our little simulation will have two relevant parameters. Number one is that everybody will act according to their rational self-interest without exception, and number two, there will be no Deus Ex Machina type situations, meaning everything will develop organically as a logical continuation of the events that happened before.
I'm gonna have to stop you right there. This implies that you know what rational self-interest looks like for everybody in an entire society. If you have this incredible knowledge, I'm quite impressed. Alright, before we start the simulation, I would like to preface with the concept of DROs, Dispute Resolution Organizations. These organizations are how a free society handles contracts and contract disputes, and restitution if any party violates a contract. Again, see the book Practical Anarchy for a much better explanation of these than I can come up with. A free society will have several competing DROs, each of which will work with each other, businesses, individuals, and anyone who wishes to mitigate risk in their contracts. In Adam's simulation, Billy Bob starts a water company, which means he will require several contractual obligations with pipe manufacturers, offices, farmers, homeowners, and anyone else who wants water, which is pretty much everyone. In order for both parties of these two-way interactions to mitigate any contractual disputes, they will have to cooperate through DROs. Now, DROs don't make money when disputes happen, as they, much like insurance, are responsible for providing restitution when contracts are violated. So their goal is to prevent the disputes by making a contract violation expensive. Reputation also plays an important role in this, as if you are known to violate contracts in the past, your premiums to engage in future contracts will be much higher, as you present a much higher risk to the DRO. Some DROs might even straight up refuse to work with frequent violators outright. So keep this concept in mind as we work through the simulation.
So over here we have a network of smaller settlements, each operating their own basic infrastructure, just like during medieval times.
This is kind of weird because he said we would have all the existing infrastructure, so why are we starting with a basic settlement that he compares to medieval times? A free society might have small towns like this, but technology is going to be just as advanced as today. Communication, transportation to other towns and cities is going to be just as easy as it is now. So this town will be by no means isolated. People will be able to come and go as they please.
In these settlements, eventually some people start getting more successful at capitalism than others. Let's call them great men. And we'll be focusing on one of them, this fellow called Billy Bob, living in the town of Ironville. Now, Ironville does have its own little water system, but the water quality is not the greatest.
I'm going to skip through a portion of his explanation. Basically, Billy Bob, because the water isn't very good, decides to create his own water distillery and starts a company from it.
He now sells a lot of water and makes large amounts of money. Now, Billy Bob is forward-thinking and keeps reinvesting his revenue back into his business. With his profits, he buys a plot of land behind the saloon and builds a huge water storage tank. He also builds out pipes to the farmlands nearby and starts selling his water to the farmers. With his increasing profits, he hires workers to build and maintain water purifiers. Soon enough, he has enough capital to offer a handsome amount for the local water system. The owners like his offer and sell him all their infrastructure. After all, they weren't making as much money on it anyway. They didn't really know what they were doing, the water quality was bad, they had a large maintenance backlog, and most people in Ironville just went on collecting rainwater and boiling it anyway.
So this is the start of what I think is the biggest issue with the entire explanation. It starts off pretty decent, but when it comes to hypotheticals like this one, any quote-unquote profit gets stretched to basically infinite money. Most companies can only make a couple percentage points of growth in a year because if they go for more, they They welcome being undercut by other businesses. Here, Billy Bob is dealing with some incredible expenses, like building pipes to farmland and other giant infrastructure costs. We're just assuming that he can pay for all of this and buy out a whole nother business.
So they are more than happy to just pull the golden parachute and get rid of all their problems and go on to do something else. Following the acquisition, Billy Bob founds the Bill and Robert Water Company. Now everyone in town is his current or potential customer. Billy Bob has his workers connect his purifiers to the system, filling the pipes with his water. He also spends on maintenance, replacing rusty pipes and leaky valves, which increases the water quality and reduces water loss. His customer base starts to grow rapidly. People happily sign the contract stating that they'll get the water cheaper than under the previous owners and at a guaranteed higher quality. They can also disconnect from Billy Bob's pipes for the equivalent of $1,000 as a service fee, but why would they? The water is cheap and great. As time goes on, other people try to get in on the water business too, offering their own water from their own purifiers. Only a few people switch over though, since Billy Bob's water is reasonably priced and of high quality, and there is a $1,000 disconnect fee which nobody wants to pay.
We're already seeing some red flags from Billy Bob here, but his product is water, which everyone needs, and so everyone's going to be massively suspicious of his business practices, and they're going to demand maximum transparency to ensure that his product will not be used against the population. This is going to include massive pressure from the DROs Billy Bob is working with to mitigate his contract risk. Any anti-competitive behavior, like a $1,000 disconnection fee, is the exact kind of thing that's going to raise suspicion. Billy Bob could choose to handle contracts without going through any DROs, but that would greatly limit his customer base, as his customers very likely would prefer to use DROs themselves. And if you show a desire to bypass DROs, it reveals your intentions to act dishonestly.
But then a true prodigy appears, an even greater man who creates a water purifier that's even better than Billy Bob's. Worse, he starts selling the water from it, and some people actually switch over and they are very satisfied with the water. It's even cheaper and even better quality. And this even greater man even starts making some money on his business, sucking away profits from Billy Bob. Now Billy Bob gets word of this, so he visits this prodigy personally and offers to buy out his business, but he gets rejected. Billy Bob goes on to use his considerable wealth and leverage to artificially lower the price of water even below the competitor's price. Although he goes into the red somewhat, he has enough money stockpiled to survive. The prodigy less so by virtue of being a small business. He also has to lower his price to compete, otherwise nobody would buy water from him.
So the stock market should still exist. So how is going into the red going to affect shareholders of Billy Bob's company? Surely none of them are going to be happy about this.
His customers start to dwindle, many switching back over to Billy Bob, who announces a $500 water coupon bonus to be given to all returning customers. After months of losses, the prodigy is at the end of his rope. At this point, Billy Bob visits him again and makes a new offer. A very pretty sum of cash for his business and a lucrative upper management position within the Bill and Robert Water Company, together with a luxury executive penthouse.
Okay, if his prices are so low and he's giving out coupons, how is he still going to be able to afford penthouses, massive bonuses, and all this stuff that he's offering the guy? Also, as soon as the DROs notice his anti-competitive behavior, his rates are just going to skyrocket and he's not going to be able to provide low prices. But we're sort of still under the assumption that Billy Bob pretty much has infinite money, so he undercuts the other business and the other business owner decides to join Billy Bob's company, get the penthouse, all of that.
And Billy Bob now controls the town's entire water market. He stops the price dumping and returns to making massive profits, now even more since the prodigy helps increase the efficiency. With his innovations, that is.
Okay, so he's raised his prices back up, now that he has acquired the competition. Red flag, red flag, red flag. People aren't just going to accept an arbitrary price increase, okay? Actually, what does the water contract with Billy Bob even look like? Is there not a clause for guaranteed rates, at least for a certain amount of time? Are businesses in charge of building and selling homes not concerned that there's only one water supplier? Are farmers not concerned? Are the DROs not concerned? How do you sell a home with a contract that states that your water prices can be arbitrarily raised and lowered based on the decisions of one dude, and the homeowner is going to have no recourse? Everyone in the town has a huge incentive to keep people in the town happy, so that they can all continue to have jobs and engage in the business. So nobody's going to want Billy Bob's water company driving people to move out of the town. The thing about every decision in a free society being voluntary is that anything that harms people is going to be massively de-incentivized.
But aside from doing his business, Billy Bob also likes to read, mainly about great men in the past and what they did to succeed. He comes across the idea of buying out as much of the production chain as possible, the chain that supplies the business, that is. So Billy Bob might be selling the water, but it's not his company that manufactures manufactures the pipes, or mines the ore to smelt the metal, or makes the parts for the purifiers. And so he goes on to acquire as many of these enterprises as possible using the same tactic, offering management positions and large salaries.
Just another example of the infinite money this guy apparently has, which is apparently enough to acquire several other industries, all with their own customers, own competitors, shareholders, once again, massively suspicious, and is going to set off every DRO involved.
He now owns mines, foundries, machine building workshops, and optimizes their production for his goals. Those enterprises might suffer losses due to this, but the water company gets materials much cheaper and the gains far outpace the losses, which Billy Bob of course ends up cross-subsidizing.
Yeah, I'm very sus about how this actually works out monetarily.
But Billy Bob doesn't stop there. He becomes obsessed with control. He now owns all of his production chain but decides he wants more. But what else can he acquire? Well, the other end, of course. His biggest customers are farmers who use his water for irrigation. With Billy Bob's advanced irrigation systems made by his foundries and workshops, the farms grew to the point where they could not sustain themselves with their own wells anymore, and so they became dependent on Billy Bob's water.
And apparently it's only after they're totally dependent on Billy Bob's water that they wake up and realize, wait a second, I'm totally dependent on Billy Bob's water, and that's going to cause major issues for me in the future if I don't do something about it. No, people don't just find themselves in these situations, alright? Something like full dependence on one company to survive is such a simple problem to identify that of course people are going to figure out ways to prevent this.
But hey, it's a great deal, so they're not complaining. Billy Bob founds the Bill and Robert Agricultural Company and starts buying out all the land plots around Ironville. His tactics are the same: offer the owners generous terms and occasionally a high position and lucrative salary, if Billy Bob deems the owner to be a potential valuable addition to his team, that is. And so most landowners end up taking his offer. And those who initially don't are either swayed by secret deals where Billy Bob offers them a price well above market, or by threatening with accidents, quote-unquote, happening to the pipes that feed those particular plots.
Oh, you've done it now. You've gone full mafia. We have reached the point of secrecy and threats. So much for being a great man. Billy Bob must be as dumb as they come, because the moment word gets out that he's violating people's rights, it is all over. And since DROs demand transparency, word will get out. Now, we would never reach the point where Billy Bob's company is still directly and solely owned by him, with no say from shareholders, stakeholders, or lower managers, no succession plan, and he has monopoly over all of the water. But regardless, after Billy Bob pulls this, no DRO will be willing to work with him in the future. No company will accept his contracts because their DROs will consider it far too risky. All profits will be cut off immediately. His business will die. His assets will be seized as restitution for his massive contract violations as per the DRO agreements, and he will be done.
One way or another, Billy Bob ends up owning all the land plots around town, satisfying his growing urge for ownership and control, for the time being anyway. And because of his great public business practices, nobody opposes him. Everybody wants to see him succeed. He's a great manager, a benefactor of prodigies, and his cheap, high-quality water helps the local industry, supporting breweries, distilleries, a paper mill, and even a paint factory. His success is everyone else's success, and Ironville is booming because of him. A true great man he is.
Man, I can't believe Adam still claims there wouldn't be an ounce of suspicion for the water monopoly man.
But the success begins to draw some shady characters into the area. Raider gangs from the abandoned areas in the south start harassing the town. The townsfolk organize into a militia and manage to fend off the attackers, but just barely. Dozens die to gunshot wounds, and the townsfolk come together on the main square to honor the dead.
This hypothetical is so bizarre. So raider gangs from an abandoned area are harassing the town. In hopes of what? Dying? The raider gangs all just die here, so why were they attacking in the first place? Adam gives no explanation as to what they were looking for, what they were trying to accomplish, or why they would choose crime to achieve their goals rather than participating in the society peacefully, as there are pretty much no positive incentives to be a criminal in the society. These raiders are just such a false and unsubstantiated premise.
At the ceremony, Billy Bob delivers a speech lamenting their heroic sacrifice. He ends his speech by announcing the foundation of a permanent security force under his control to defend the town, so that nothing like this will happen ever again. Anyone can enlist. The gear and training are provided, together with free company housing and a good salary. A few months later, Blackwater Security already has 100 members who, aside from guarding the perimeters, also patrol inside Ironville to keep up the order. That way, people no longer have to bother with organizing militias and neighborhood watches and have more time to spend freely.
Yes, so using the infinite cash he still has and the raiders that make no sense at all, Billy Bob developed a security company that provides free housing and salary, Where is he getting all of this money?
The next raider attack gets repelled much easier thanks to the organized, semi-professional defense force. Though casualties are minimal, the raiders manage to do significant damage to certain parts of the town.
So after the last set of raiders all died, the next set were like, nah, this time it's gonna work, and we're gonna get all the, stuff. Whatever it is we're doing this for.
Billy Bob wants to pay for the reconstruction out of his own pocket, announcing his intentions in front of a cheering crowd. He also suggests building a defensive structure around the town, which he would gladly help finance, but most of the money would come from people's pockets. At first, not everyone is on board with the idea, but in a few months following raider sightings and a massive pro-wall campaign, which appears to be grassroots but is financed completely by Billy Bob from the shadows, the public opinion shifts and the wall gets built around Ironville.
So Billy Bob builds the wall and makes the people pay for it, something he convinces everyone to do using a propaganda campaign. And everyone who lives in this free society that are doubtless educated on the predations and immorality of both governments and government propaganda just accepts this. Seeing as the education system in a free society wouldn't be 14 years of propaganda like we have now, I don't think this would work. Propaganda takes a long time to sink in, which is why you have to indoctrinate children to make it work. Convincing people in a free society to give away their income to one ruling body? Good luck.
The town becomes completely safe, which gives a boost to its economy and draws in a lot of people from all around the area who move in for that safety and stability. Soon enough, Ironville almost doubles in population thanks to its appeal and the generously low rent prices offered by the Bill and Robert Real Estate Company, which, aside from apartments, also builds a massive fortification at the center of the town as Billy Bob's pet project. It's an added second line of defense that people can retreat to in case the wall got breached. This added security draws in even more people and consequently causes significant appreciation in property prices. Everyone is in favor of building the fort. Once completed, Billy Bob moves his entire headquarters inside it. At this point, Billy Bob owns the water system, the land around town, multiple mines, workshops, foundries, a huge number of buildings in town, a security force, a wall, and a fort.
And Billy Bob continues to build massive walls with the infinite money he has. We've gotten so far into the realm of impossibility within any free society that this is hardly even worth delving into the specifics of the rest of it. So to summarize, Billy Bob buys the media, suppresses dissent, takes over the court system, imposes fees on certain living areas, and basically turns things into a government.
Okay, alright, so what do we have here? A well-protected town with a fortified administrative center. Outside there is a lower class, mostly working the fields. Inside we have a privileged citizen class, and most aspects of life are controlled by a sort of nobility, who are only accountable to the man above them. And of course most of everything is owned by that man alone. So, through this simulation, by starting out with the most ideal circumstances possible for an ANCAP society to rise, we ended up with a sort of enlightened feudalism. And why wouldn't we? You know, capitalism is fundamentally based on a government-like hierarchy. One that isn't democratic. So once you introduce a power vacuum by ending the government, it makes sense that capitalism will fill that vacuum, but this time with a truly autocratic structure.
This conclusion is so wrong, it bothers me immensely. And I think it comes back to the fact that Adam doesn't seem to have a principled perspective when it comes to the use of violence. He was able to come up with a scenario where freedom devolves into political control and violence, but his alternative is to just skip the freedom and go straight to the violence inherent in democracy. As I said in my last response to Adam, there's nothing magic about voting that suddenly makes the resulting government an entity of virtue. But it's likely that anyone watching my video already understands how democracy really works. The things the government promises, healthcare, education of the poor, elimination of poverty, democracy suggests that these are things that society actually wants and is willing to pay for collectively. If this is true, and the majority of the population is already willing to give up a portion of their income to support these efforts, then the government isn't needed to force people to pay for these things through violence. They would just be paid for anyway. On the other hand, if our society does not actually want to pay for these things, then democracy is just a big farce, and we're living in a tyranny where they just get to choose what we have to pay for. And that's what it comes down to. The government is only ever needed to enforce things people don't want. War, incarceration of nonviolent criminals for drug offenses, forced taxation, propaganda-filled schools, multi-tiered healthcare systems, and most recently, tyrannical multi-year-long COVID restrictions and mandates. A free society is the only logical conclusion of the elimination of violence in society. Adam has no interest in actually eliminating violence. He's perfectly satisfied with giving the exclusive right to commit violence to the specific leaders that are elected every few years.